On the menu today, I'll be taking Blue Ridge Falls, mixed with a healthy portion of At Dawn's Light, and gently seasoned with some warm winter sun. Put those in the pot, give it a stir, and see what we can cook up. Hello, welcome back to the studio. Well, as you saw from my little introduction there, I've been cooking up a new painting for you. It's Blue Ridge Falls with a good dose of At Dawn's Light and a little bit of the warm winter sun for the background. I did this to show you how you can take 2 or 3 Bob Ross classics and just mix them in together and make an original painting of your own. So, if you're ready for a slice of this, sit back and relax. Knife and fork at the ready? Didn't think you'd hear me say that, did you? And let's paint this particular painting. And whilst I'm doing that, think of a good name for it and drop it in the comments down below.
So here's my canvas, 16 by 20, painted with grey gesso, just to tone it down a little. To start with, I need to be using some black gesso. I've put some on a small plate, and I'm using a piece of old car sponge that, well, I've doctored up with a pair of pliers. Give it a bit of a tearing up to make it nice and rough. I start off by tapping into a little gesso and knocking off the surplus. I want to do some planning, of course. Firstly, my horizon line, a little below centre, and maybe I want to position some trees. This is based on a Bob Ross classic called Blue Ridge Falls, a lovely waterfall painting surrounded by fir trees. I've got another idea in mind for this painting, so I'll position them carefully. Now, just using the corner of that piece of sponge, just create the basic shape of the fir trees. Don't worry if they're not perfect. Trees rarely ever are, and we'll be going over them with some oils anyway. We're just looking for the rough shape and position at this stage. Don't worry if there are a few holes here and there, it won't show in the final part of the painting. Now, let's leave this to dry completely. I'll start my watch. And wearing some paint was all part of the fun. I check my canvases dried completely before moving to the oils, and I'm starting with this Bob Ross Liquid Clear Oil Paint. I keep some in a small airtight container for ease of application. I'm using an old landscape Bob Ross 1-inch brush. I want to really scrub this onto the canvas. Take a good firm grip and really scrub it. I can't stress this enough. If you put on too much and too thickly, well, your painting will be very difficult to paint. I put a thin, even coat on. Now, here's a quick way of testing your canvas. I just use a light. This time it's on my mobile phone. And as you can see, I can skate my finger over it and green tick. It's just what I want. Slightly damp, not too thick. But here, not so good. I put on just too much. No, that'll be definitely too wet. So scrub this off and make it nice and thin. I finish off with some long flat strokes just to even out the surface and get rid of any of those little wet spots. Remember, thin even coat. I finish off by dry cleaning that 1-inch brush because I'm going to use it again. Now here's my palette. I've got a couple of colours to come yet, but basically this is it. And I'm going to start off with this one, Yellow Ochre. I'm using that same 1-inch brush and I go into a little of the colour and pull it out and tap it through the bristles of my brush. I want to start here, way off in the background. I want to put a nice little sort of golden glow into the back of my painting. You'll notice that I go over my trees and over the edge of my background. It won't really matter, and I can always clean that up later on if I need to. This is a semi-transparent colour, almost an opaque colour because it's got quite a white base to it, but as you see by scrubbing it on thinly, I can still see the shape of my trees clearly. I've added more than I think I need at this stage, a little higher up the canvas, because the next colour's going to take over some of the position. I mix up a nice lavender colour, alizarin crimson and phthalo blue, very much more of the crimson. Here you see my colour, but to really get a good idea of how much lavender I've made, I add a little white to the side of it and stir it together. I want a very pastel colour at this stage, maybe slightly more to the red side. I've dipped my brush into a little of the alizarin crimson and blend it together and test it on my canvas. As you can see, my first test was a little bit pale, a little bit more crimson, and I get that lovely rosy pink colour I'm looking for. When this bumps into the yellow ochre, it makes a warm orange tone, sort of peachy, just right for my little sunrise or a sunset painting. I'll let you decide what time of day it is. Time for some blending. Dry clean that 1-inch brush really well, and you want to go back across your sky, knocking out any harsh shapes or marks, any brush marks, anything you don't really like. If you have a little feature there you want to keep, then leave it in. I actually want to add a few little clouds to my painting, just little stringy doers as Bob would say. I tap into a small amount of the lavender colour. Notice how I angle my brush down about 45 degrees and just tap. Now, I don't want these clouds to really be too bold. I want them again quite soft and pastel. I tap quite a lot to get a little bit of an impression of the paint. I'd rather go slowly and add them gently than add too much and make them too bold. I finish them off with some long flat strokes, just streaking out the paint a little further. And there we have it. My background sky is complete. I've tidied up my palette, moved this light colour to one side, and I'm going to use that same brush, dry clean very well, to pick up some lavender colour. I'm going to apply a good coating over the black gesso. Notice here when I test it with my finger, I get a good strong colour. That's important because you don't want your painting to sort of turn a bit grey looking. I add more and keep testing as I go. Let's add some small fir trees to our painting. For this, I'm going to use a filbert brush. Bob didn't do this technique, but it's one that I've used successfully many times to teach people how to paint really small trees if they're struggling with a fan brush. Just be sure it's a nice quality one and that you can get the bristles to lay nice and flat. These trees are far away in my painting, and I start off by just marking a centre line. I think I'll make this one a little bit taller. Now, use the shape of the brush to create the shape of the branches. Just press gently, zigzagging across the centre line of your tree to create a miniature fir tree. It's as simple as that. Add as many or as few as you wish to your scene. I'll use a few little upward strokes to create some vegetation at the base of the trees. Of course, this wouldn't be a Bob Ross painting if you weren't ready for a Bravery test. It's time for the waterfall. I use a clean, dry, small fan brush with a little bit of the lavender colour from the sky, a touch more of titanium white, even a little phthalo blue. I want to bring my waterfall in a little bit lower than this horizon line. I'll start off with just a little bit of background water first. Use the fan brush on edge and just little zigzagging strokes backwards and forwards. I need probably about 1 inch or so depth from the horizon line to the edge of the waterfall. Don't get it too bright at this stage, that's a bit of a top tip. If it's all too bright and still dazzling, it almost sort of takes your eye away from the next stage, which is of course the waterfall, and that's a quick choo. Yes, the sound effects are what you need. A little bit of zigzagging again just to smooth things out in the background, and then again, firm pressure, really press and choo. Let gravity take your hand and let the paintbrush fall straight to the bottom of the canvas. Smooth out any little high spots in the background, and before you know it, you'll have a waterfall too. I left a little gap, of course, for a rock. Talking of rocks, let's mix a colour for them. Take in some black and a touch of Van Dyke brown, about equal parts. Mix them well. I want a sort of a charcoal brown colour. This will be the underpainting for all of the rocks. I take a small amount on the edge of the palette knife and I'll use this to sculpt the shape. Once again, I tried increasing the exposure to show a little of the detail in my video, but I'm painting dark on dark again. It's a bit tricky really. So if things look a little bit too bright occasionally, I'm just doing my best to try and show you some detail. I decided to add a little bit of white paint to this side, when it's grubby white, to give you an idea of exactly where these rocks are going to go. Again, a small roll on the edge of my palette knife. Now, top tip here, make sure you come in above the line of the waterfall. If you come in below that line, well, I'm afraid you wouldn't have a waterfall, would you? Again, apply this with some firm pressure. Just press it down into the canvas. This is just a stain of colour. If you leave it too thick and chunky, then it'll be hard to make a highlight stick. See, I go back to the first side here and just scrape out the excess paint. Allowing a few rocks to stick out in front of the waterfall adds depth and distance to your painting. Don't forget, let's add the little rock in the centre. Time for a highlight. For this, I'm taking some titanium white, some of the original rock colour, that's the brown and black, and adding a little yellow ochre, and I'll use this as a marble mix. Yes, not quite what I had in mind. The problem is once you get a mixture that looks really kind of yucky, then there's not much you can do with it. It doesn't matter what you add to it or how many times you turn it over, it just doesn't look right. Best to just ditch it and start over. This time I'm using Van Dyke Brown on its own with white and ochre. And black, I'm afraid, was the culprit for my problem. It turned everything sort of grey. Once again, gentle pressure here. Think about where the light might catch these rocks. Tops of ledges and edges. Dark undercuts. You'll see later on in my painting that I get myself into, well, a bit of a pickle with these. But they're very easy to fix. Just have some fun and don't overthink it too much. Let the knife do the work. Let it jump and bump and run. Let's add a few little rocks to the distant shoreline as well. Just a few here and there. A little tiny touch of highlight. Not too bright though. Perfect. I think I need to do something though with these trees. They sort of stayed in the mist and the fog long enough. If you've seen me paint fir trees before, you know that I like to mark the centre line and then use that same dark lavender colour on a fan brush and just pressing downwards. Don't let the brush slide. I'm just looking to create a lovely dark silhouette, an outline of the tree. I let it extend further and further down my painting. Even though you can't see the paint, I'm texturing my canvas. I'll see if I can get a shot of that. I'll use my other camera to see if I can sort of give you some detail that you can't see easily at this point in the painting. Here you can see, if I angle my camera upward, all the lovely texture of my brush strokes. This gives a lovely grippy surface for the highlights, so don't forget to add it on your own painting. You'll find highlighting so much easier. But first we need a few tree trunks. I'm going to use some of the marble mixture from the rocks. On the edge of my palette knife, take a very tiny little roll and just here and there down the centre line of these trees. Just a little touch. I do little stop starts because I only want them to sort of show through here and there between the foliage. Add a few in a few other places as well, even if you haven't got a full tree there. It really helps to fill out the painting. Now for some snowy highlights. I once again go back into that very pale lavender colour. Notice how I push my fan brush into the paint to get a little ridge of colour. Now, gently does it. I'm going to touch mainly to the right hand side on the tops of these branches. Imagine how snow would just fall and lay on them. A little brighter to the top maybe, and a little shadowy and darker in the centre and to the left. Wonder where the light source is going to be for my painting. Well, you should be able to guess from where I've done these highlights. As I get to the bottom of the tree and down below the edge of the waterfall, I let the paint run out of my brush. Darker, darker, darker. More down into the shadows. Let these colours just overlap the edges of the rocks. Again, it helps to push everything back in our painting. Here's another clue about where the light source is going to be in my painting. These trees I'm highlighting predominantly on the left. A little shadowy in the centre and almost nothing to the right. Top tip, don't over highlight your fir trees. It's so easy just to smother everything in lots of paint, so hold back at this stage. I've got a soft new Bob Ross 1-inch landscape brush and I add just a small amount of that sort of off-white colour for some splash and crash at the base of the waterfall. I don't want this too bright. I'll add some, tap it in well so I pick up some of the lavender that we put on there and tone things down. I can always add a second layer. So again, keep this a little bit sort of dull. Don't worry if it's too deep. We'll turn some of that into water. Here you see I go back and add a few little extra sparkles. Because I wasn't too bright to start with, it means these really stand out. I use my fan brush on edge, zigzag backwards and forwards and convert some of the spray to water. Remember, this whole area down here is covered with lavender. We put it on right at the very start. So any colour that you add here will automatically be tinted. I'll just do a few nice zigzag strokes just to get a feel for it and add a few bright highlights later on. Speaking of which, I think I need to do something on this edge. It looks a little bit sharp here, so I'm going to use just the corner of my fan brush just to touch in a little bit of extra splash and crash. And with that, I think my waterfall is complete. I might add a little extra brightness across the surface though. Once again, think about how the light would travel from the back of your painting forward into the foreground. Just a few little zigzags is all it takes. I'm going to add a rock or two. I think one here should fit nicely. Just as before, a nice Van Dyke brown and black underpainting and a touch of highlight. I'll give him a little friend. Tuck in the water around the base of these rocks. Just a few little touches of highlight is all it takes, just to settle them into the water. I'll add some foliage around them later on. But I've got this big dark area over here on the right. I fill it with some more rocks, but I can't help feeling maybe I've overdone it slightly. A bit too bright. This is where I got myself into a bit of a pickle. I went a bit highlight happy. Spend a few moments just picking off some of that surplus paint and putting back some Van Dyke brown and black. This step makes a huge difference and it turns my rocks from being sort of over highlighted to being nicely highlighted. There you go, a quick before and after. I saved this nice dark area for some feature foliage. I'm using my fan brush again. I'm just going to tap and shape the sort of idea that there's some nice branches in here. I don't know what sort of bush or trees these could be because once they're covered with thick snow, it tends to sort of make things a little bit more sort of distorted. I start off by just having some of this foliage overlapping the edge of the rocks. Wasn't it handy we took away some of that bright highlight? See, there's a method to my madness after all. I want to keep it darker to the right and a little brighter to the left. And I also maybe want a little more brightness towards the top of some of these little branches. I do small steps, adding a little highlight, standing back, and then adding a little more. This way I can gently build up this area without overdoing it. you see it would be quite easy to fix by just taking a palette knife and scraping it all off, but I think by taking your time with it, you actually get a nicer result. That's not to say that you can't get yourself into a bit of a pickle. We'll see that in just a moment. So take your time and enjoy the process. Do a little, stand back. Do a little more and stand back again. Build this up slowly and gently. You'll find the results are so much more pleasing than if you sort of rush it. Whilst I'm thinking about shape and form here, I'll keep on adding a little bit more highlight over the edge of these rocks as well. I'll add some highlight to this left hand side. I can't help feeling though that I've done something to those bushes on the right hand side that look a little odd. I think I can see maybe a group of little men standing in the rain holding newspapers above their heads. I think I might have to go back and do something about it. Can you see here these 4 little blobs? They do look like little figures standing there. I've got some more figures standing in front of them. Whenever I see this in my paintings, I know the easy fix is simply to join 1 or 2 of them together. Just try and lose that regular shape. I'll add these 3 together, and maybe a couple more to the left, just here. And before you know it, my little figures have disappeared and turned into bushes.
Well, my painting's progressing nicely, but I can't help feeling it lacks a certain something. Winter scenes tend to be a little bit drab sometimes, a bit sort of blue and grey. So I think it's time to inject a little bit of colour into winter. I think that little burst of light in the background is what my painting really needs. Then we'll add a little bit more of the dawn's light ingredients too. Sit tight for a bit more cookery.
Time to test your powers of observation. Did you notice this? If you did, here's your gold star. That's right, I didn't paint this little fir tree, I just left it as an underpainting. I had a reason for this. I had something in mind. I'll use a little cotton bud just to clean off some of that paint from the sky, because I want to use that area for my light source. I take a little bit of Indian yellow, a touch of bright red, and mix a lovely warm orangey colour. I'm going to use this to sort of indicate where the heat of the sun might be. I'll use my little cotton bud and take a small amount of this paint and just gently massage it into the painting. I want this to look like the sun rays burning through the side of this tree. It's the reason why I didn't underpaint it. If I put lavender on there, I'd be in a heck of a mess right now. I'm also very careful to add a little bit of this to the horizon line, once again staying just above where I've painted that dark bushy area. I'll work this into my background sky. I'm looking for this lovely warm glow. Now let's add the sun. I'm using a tiny touch of titanium white paint into a little more of that yellowy colour. Not perfectly clean Indian yellow, with a little hint of orange. And pick a nice little point just to the side of this tree. I just want to stipple this on. I don't really want a hard shape here. I want it to look sort of dappled. Once you've added the paint, get the size a little bigger, and then make sure you use a nice clean finger for this. Just tap gently. Remember, there's no lavender there, so you can't really go too far wrong. I want this to look like the sort of sunlight is just burning through the edge of the tree. It creates a lovely little sort of silhouette. And I just tap some of that orangey colour and a few sun rays. And there you have it. It's a nice little technique, and one that you can really play with. But once again, my usual advice, don't overdo it. I stand back and add a tiny little bit more brightness to it. A few more rays of light here and there. I think I've almost cracked it. If you enjoy my tutorials, don't forget, you can support the work I do by adding a few pennies into my coffee cup. There's a link down below in the description. I spent all the money on new painting materials. Thank you. As you see, now I've got the light source organised, I can really work out where to put my highlights. I start off using a liner brush for this, just a few touches of really brilliant, lovely golden yellow light here and there on the branches. But this is going to take me a long, long time. I'll get back to that in a minute. I think it's time to add a little bit of a shimmer on the water. I use my palette knife and take a little bit of this really bright yellow colour here and very gently just massage it in to the water. Don't forget, there's some lavender on here, so this might discolour quite quickly. Just add a little, rub it in, and then get a little more. If you work it too much, then obviously this will go a sort of a funny tobacco brown colour. So the trick is a little and often, and don't work it too hard. I set my liner brush aside and go back to using my fan brush for this highlighting stage. Remember, I didn't overdo it with the snowy part. Once again, I was planning ahead. I hadn't planned though on forgetting to push record once more. I got so excited, I got carried away. I use that highlight on the fan brush. And there we have it. A reimagined version of Blue Ridge Falls, except with snow.
So there we have it. Take 2 or 3 Bob Ross classics, mix them up together and make an original piece of art. But don't move, because there's some more original art coming your way next. Happy painting, people. Time for some more cookery, I think.